Well, this is Brian O'Haron. We've got a lot of good news this week, especially if you're a fiscal conservative, the way I defined it last week on my program. It's on the internet if you want to see it. www.ctv13.net. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Have a look at it. The picture you see up there on the screen is Lisa Smith, Democratic select person in Winsted, Connecticut. I want to talk a bit about her for probably 20-30 minutes here at the beginning of the program. But first I want to tell you a quick story. I was lolling around the house the other day, probably playing one of my instruments, and I got a call from Wales. And it was two former employees that I hadn't seen in, I'd say, 30 years. They were visiting each other in Wales. One of them is now living in Florida, but she went to Wales to visit her friend. And they started to thank me for all they learned 30 years ago or so when I worked in London, and they worked for me. And they told me how successful they were, and they were pleased as punch, and had wanted to get in touch with me and thank me because they are now both very successful business women in their own right, one in Wales and one down in Florida. So that reminded me, I told them on the phone the same thing I told you on my prior program, is that sometimes it takes 20, 25 years before anybody realizes that they're learning anything or have learned anything in their formative years. Especially from people like me who have a different way of thinking than the normal average person. It takes a while for them to get accustomed to the system thinking, the positive thinking, and the lateral thinking that I use, although I'm pretty sure they probably went to one of the meetings where I had Edward DeBono there explaining lateral thinking. I'm sure I talked to him also a lot about system thinking because we're over in London, Charles Darwin's territory. I used to talk about that a lot over there. And of course, Edward DeBono's, at the time, he's Maltese, but he was at Cambridge when I was over there most of the time, traveling the world. And of course, positive thinking is easy to understand, but hard to do. We're going to talk a bit about that tonight, especially when I talk about Lisa. Now, 2 years ago and before, I would say 4 years ago, when the Republicans were the majority in the Board of Selectmen, and there was a lot of hoo-ha about the Gang of Five and yelling and screaming and jumping up and down and letters to the editor and comments in the blog, and mostly negative. I was not very impressed with Lisa Smith. She was, at the time, working with the Democratic selectmen that were in charge, and she was doing odd jobs for them, sort of helping get prepared for meetings and all that kind of stuff. And every once in a while she would throw in a comment of her own during a meeting at the public comment or something like that. I was very impressed at all. And during the last election 2 years ago, the last campaign, on this program many times, I suggested that perhaps you didn't vote for Lisa Smith. Only a suggestion, of course, because you can vote for whoever you want to. But I was trying to get out enough information so that people knew that we needed fiscal conservatives in the selectmen and the Board of Education, if practical, and not the big spenders. Well, in this particular case, as probably 40% of the time when you make decisions. I was wrong with that decision. Lisa Smith was elected. She was fourth in number of votes for the Democratic Party. A swing of about 18 votes could have cost her the election. The Republicans weren't far behind her with their candidate, but she won, and she got in office as a select person, and that's where she is right now. Now, when the Democrats ran for office last time, as I always tell everybody, somebody can prove me wrong on this, but I don't think so, the Democrats had on one wishy-washy commitment in their platform. And then they had a whole bunch of things they wanted to achieve but didn't really want to talk about or tell anybody. One of which, of course, was to relieve George Clawson's lawsuit, the town against George Clawson, and other things like that. But remember, most of the Democrats that are not fiscal conservatives usually say one thing and mean and do another. So when they got in, what they said in their platform, everybody will remember this, that they were going to get along with everyone. They were going to work with everybody to prove that those naughty Gang of Five were way off base when they were perceived to be, or believed to be, throwing their weight around when they were in office. I don't happen to agree with that, but that was the propaganda that was put out by the Democrats at that time. They were also going through evolutionary within their own party, replacing some of the old guard with the new guard, which they succeeded in doing by winning the election. But that was what they campaigned on. Let's all work together. Let's not call anybody any names. Let's not be mean. Let's be a team. Let's all work together. And of course, the first thing they did when they got elected was to overlook the second highest vote getter, Kenny Fracasso, for the second selectman in this administration. So I think that was a big, big mistake. I think that's one of the first inclinations we all had that they weren't working together. Had they put Ken Fracasso in as second selectman, they would have made a big step forward with the Republican Party, I'm sure. They wouldn't have changed their philosophy, but at least they would have been able to talk together, and it would have looked a lot better to the taxpayers if they had done the right thing by selecting Fracasso, but they didn't. They put George Clawson in, who was not the second highest vote getter. There's no rule that says they have to put in the second highest vote getter, and there's no rule that says the highest vote getter has to be mayor. That's kind of a tradition around here that has happened over the years, but it's not really a charter commitment. So they can, but when you run on a charter, that's their platform that says you're going to get along with everybody, and then when somebody wins the second highest number of votes, a few short of the top vote getter, it would be a great move to acknowledge that and to begin to work together right from day one. When the first picture is taken down at Town Hall and the first article about it is in the newspaper, and when everybody's sworn in, that would be the time to announce it. But if not, the first selectman meeting where they make the vote, that would have been a good thing to do. They didn't do it. Not only that, but within the Democratic Party, and remember they had the upheaval within the Democratic Party at the same time, where the old guard was replaced by the new guard, and Candy Perez and George Clausen were made the co-chairman of the Democratic Party, replacing the old guard that was in there before. And a bunch of new members were put onto the town committee. And there are signs and rumors around town that even they can't get along with each other. You got a little friction there between maybe perhaps the Naders and the old guard of the Democrats and the new guard of the Democrats. So you got a multi-ring circle there. I alluded to this in the last program, but the Democratic Party is made up of a whole bunch of small individual pressure groups, all joining together to get leverage for their own particular ideas. So it's like this: you support my minority view and I'll support your minority view, and then we'll both support somebody else's minority view. So you got a little conflict built right into the approach there. The Republicans don't have that. They have some minorities in their operation too. But one way or another, it's just a question of how fiscally conservative they are. There aren't too many big spenders in there that believe that you should spend before you earn. Most of them think the opposite. But anyway, surprise, surprise. Much to my surprise, much to everybody in town's surprise, much to the Democratic town committee's surprise, most of the Republican Party's surprise, and the Independent Party and the Taxpayers Association, Lisa Smith seems to be the only Democratic select person that has honored that commitment from the platform. I didn't expect that to happen. I'm greatly surprised and happy that it did, and that has forced me to change my opinion about Lisa Smith, because I've seen her in action now for 2 years, and she's been trying to work with everybody. She's been trying to work with the Democrats, what I would call the older school Democrats. Some of them have approached me on the street, and they're very, very happy about Lisa's performance in around town and other places. She tried to work with what I call the more modern Democrats that have taken over the party in the last couple of years, who are big spenders and not fiscally conservative, in my opinion, and include some minorities from Highland Lake. They don't represent everybody at Highland Lake. They're a minority, and they represent their own opinions. They're on the Democratic Town Committee. But Lisa tried to get along with all of them. And, as promised in the platform, she tried to get along with the Republicans, where she thought it would be something that she could help them with. Didn't always vote with the Republicans, but on some of the major issues she did. And on some of the major issues she voted with the Democrats. So I give her a great round of applause, and so should you, and thank you, for working with everybody, including her own party members, who halfway along through the reign of this group, about a year ago, they publicly, in articles and on the blogs and the newspapers and with the newspaper reporters and things like that, expressed disapproval with Lisa Smith, one of their own, and thought that she was a turncoat for trying to work with everybody else on the Board of Selectmen. And also with everybody in the Democratic-controlled, and when I say Democratic-controlled, I don't mean just the members of the Democratic Party. Kathy O'Brien, who's the chairperson, is a Democrat, although she was in good faith supported by both political parties in the last election. There are another Democrat or two on there, but the remainder are what I call Democratic supporters. Dr. Dutton, and people that are not a member of a party, have run on their own ticket. So Lisa tried to get along with them as well. Now that's not easy, because they're not easy to get along with, and it's very hard for them to get anybody to get the facts from the Board of Education. Talk a bit about that tonight too. So anyway, she tried, and in the end there was a lot of acrimony, and they told her they probably, from what I hear, I wasn't there, I didn't hear it in person, but rumors were going around that they didn't want to back her on their ticket, the Democrats, for this coming election. That turned out to be true because a few months ago, Lisa decided that she would run on her own as a Democrat for a seat on the Board of Selectmen in this coming election. I told her I would support her, and I know a lot of other people in town that will support her, and encouraged her to run. And she has filled out a petition with the state, and she has recently announced, just a few days ago, that she will run for selectman in the next election. And I'm very, very happy to hear that. I think she did the best of anyone in her party to try to work with members of the other factions to do good for the town. Now, in case you're not familiar with Lisa Smith, you can see her at most of the meetings, selectmen meetings, and other types of special selectmen meetings, as well as other things I'll mention. She grew up in Dallas, Texas. She graduated from high school and went to Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas. She met her husband, Doug Smith, a Winston native, while he was in the Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas. Doug's very smart. I've seen him at various meetings. He's very, very, very fiscally astute. He attended all of the Winston schools, and is a Gilbert graduate. After the Air Force, Doug went on to UConn and graduated at the top of his class. He now works at the Travelers Insurance Company in finance, and has also been a varsity wrestling coach, which I think he still does, at Gilbert for 11 years. He's quiet, doesn't make a lot of noise, but his presence is felt when he's around. Doug and Lisa have 5 boys. My mother had 2 before we had our 12 years later had my sister, and everybody would stop her on the street and say, "How can you handle 2 boys?" Born so close together, we were a year and a half apart. Well, she's got 5 boys. Plus, she's done a lot for the community, probably more than all the others put together that are on that Democratic ticket. Her first son is off to college this fall, attending the University of Connecticut. There will be 2 sons at Gilbert, 1 at Pearson, and 1 being educated in Hartford. Lisa has been on the Board of Education twice as an appointed member to fill the terms of commissioners that had resigned. Lisa has been a member of the Youth Baseball Board, Recreation Board, the ADA, and the Board of Assessment Appeals. Lisa sat on the STEEP committee, small town grant committee, and helped to secure 2 grants for the town of Winsted and Winchester. Lisa coached middle school boys baseball in the spring and helps coach a middle school wrestling program in the winter. Both those programs are at Northwest Regional number 7. There was a lot in the paper this year about Lisa working with the people in Torrington at Project Homeless as a partner to help Winsted bring some awareness to our growing homeless population, setting up homeless shelters and all the other things, good things they do. And working with one of our former town managers, she helped to put in place a protocol to provide shelter to homeless overflow in freezing temperatures if needed. And of course, over the last 2 years, she's been a very active select woman, heavily involved in some of our largest challenges during this time in our history. She's been in, of course, in office with the selectmen since the recession. After the recession, they got in office. Tough times economically for everybody in town. And we're now, if you just turn on your TV when this program's over, you'll see over the last 9 or 10 days, we lost about 1,000 points on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. We've had all that hoo-ha in Washington, D.C. about the debt. And everybody's got a lot of work cut out for them. We should have been better off here over the last 2 years had the Democrats kept their promises and worked together with everybody. Because they're in control of everything. They're in control of the Gilbert School one way or another. They're in control of the Board of Education one way or another, they and their supporters. And they're in control of the Board of Selectmen. And when Lisa votes with them, they have a lot of power. And when she votes with the Republicans, they have a lot of power. And what she's trying to do is work with both groups to get the best for the taxpayers, the children, and the residents of the town. Businesses, industry, everything. So you got to give her a lot of credit for being the only Democrat to cross party lines and be able to work with all in both the selectmen and the Board of Education. help them to try to solve their problems. Now, unfortunately, as I said last week, these are tough problems. Lisa helped a lot when the other Democrats and their supporters, the big spenders, wanted to sell the rights to town land to the Winchester Land Trust with money from the state for a song. Well, that didn't happen. Thank God for that. And it was thanks to the fiscal conservatives, Lisa and the 3 Republicans, that didn't happen. We're better off for that, in my opinion. There was no great need to do that. Also, because of the recession, and because for years we've been spending a lot more and more and more on education, and I did show you some slides a few weeks back where the contribution from the state went down by $1 million over 10 years, and the contribution by the taxpayers went up by $1 million over 10 years. And that's tough in this town. In this day and age, over the last 3-4 years, people just can't afford that. So we had to address, as a Board of Selectmen and as a Board of Education, we had to address the 65% of our budget, which is the education budget for the town of Winchester. We had to look at it, make sure that we were spending our money wisely and efficiently, and there were many, 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 many signs that we weren't. For example, last year the Board of Education overran their budget by $250,000. We're pretty sure that's what it was, although I don't think they're still positive about that. We're supposed to get the audit for the previous year, and last December we still haven't got it to this day as I speak to you. Talk a bit about more of that in a minute. And the fiscal conservative Republicans ran on a platform in the last election to move 7th and 8th grade to the Gilbert School in an attempt to save money and run the education system more efficiently. Presently, as I understand it, our schools are half empty. We have the 4 schools, 3 town schools, and the Gilbert School. And on average, they're half empty. So they decided to save some money by moving the people from 7th and 8th grade, the children, up to Gilbert, which only had about 355 students at the time, and a capacity for about 850 students. They were running at about 30 capacity, but they still had the overhead. They had to heat the building, they had to clean the building, they had to repair the building, and they had to spend all that money. So they figured, well, if we move 7th and 8th grade up there, it will absorb a lot of the overhead costs, and the cost per average student at Gilbert should go down. That was what the Republicans and Kathy O'Brien, who was a Democrat at the time, professed before the last election. It's one of the reasons Republicans backed her. Well, they won the election, and they went to put a plan together to move 7th and 8th grade up to Gilbert. That was a lot of work because there were all kinds of meetings with parents and with this and with that, and getting input from everybody. There were some groups who didn't want to move it to Gilbert. There were some who wanted to move it to Torrington or Region 7 or do this or that. But anyway, a lot hodgepodge. I went to most of the meetings myself, spoke at a couple of them, and tried to get them to make a decision one way or the other. They finally did make the decision to move 7th and 8th grade to Gilbert for many reasons, beginning of the next fiscal year, which is coming up. September, 7th and 8th will be moving to Gilbert. So they've gone through all that. They'll have to lay off some teachers to save money. There was the plan was to close a building to save money and to get a cost reduction per average student at Gilbert to save money, and that would all add up and we'd be much more efficient. We still have a long way to go. Like, we don't have one computer system for the town and the schools. We don't have one financial director for the town and the schools. We don't have one purchasing agent for the town and the schools. We don't have one maintenance group for the town and the schools. It just goes on and on. So, and we have multiple superintendents, multiple support for each superintendent, multiple principals. I mean, it all has to be looked at over the next year or two and managed into shape. They have now set up a joint financial committee. They don't have full participation from the town on that yet for one reason or another. They did change the charter so that the financial controller could be a part of all this. The town's financial director could be a part of all this and receive all the accurate information in a timely manner, which this day is said to still not happen, etc. So that's the way they went. And then what happened was, I'm going to speak in round numbers here, but basically the Board of Education came back despite having all those plans. They came back and said, well, wait a minute. Instead of cutting our budget by the money we save with the 7th and 8th move and the -1 building, etc., we need a couple $1 million more than we spent last year. And of course, that got everybody really excited. And after a lot of hodgy-bodgy, they finally asked for $1 million more than they had last year. And the selectmen, the 4 fiscal conservative, Lisa Smith, and the 3 Republicans, cut their budget to $18,500,000, give or take. And didn't grant them the extra $1 million or so that they asked for. So then there was a lawsuit filed by the Board of Education against the 4 selectmen and against the town. There were trips proposed to the state to try to get the minimum budget requirement reduced by the state, because the state tells you, even though you're winding down in your school by having less and less students and less need for all these schools, you still have to spend a minimum budget requirement that the state requires you to spend. And there's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts about that. So the Republicans and Lisa went down. They were not accompanied, to the best of my knowledge, all the time by the other Democrats. Maybe 1 or 2 went once in a while. But in general, they weren't part of the team that was trying to force the state to help us manage our system properly here, as we reduce the scope of our buildings, teachers, etc. Well, there was a lot of hodgy-bodgy in the town about, mainly stirred up by the people who didn't want to move 7th and 8th grade and were against the fiscal conservatives. They want to spend more money. Basically saying, well, you're doing stuff against the law. There's a lawsuit going on. You should spend it more. The minimum budget requirement, which nobody knew what it was at the time, blah, blah, blah. So there are a couple trips, couple meetings with the state. And the good news is that it looks like these 4 fiscal conservatives, we don't have all the numbers in yet. We don't have all the meetings over with the state yet. But it looks like they were probably right, most likely right, in their approach, which was led by one of their helpers, who's now running for a select person. That's Marcia. And Marcia is running as a selectman, but she, for 5 years, her name is Marcia Sterling, for 5 years, she's been in dealing with the Board of Education and the schools, trying to understand all the numbers and the state. And she really is getting to be an expert on the financial situation of our schools in this town. Probably knows more than anybody else around here about it. Because she's been digging in. She's taking a lot of heat for it. People think she's got a lot of moxie, and especially people who don't want anybody to know what the true state of affairs is, that kind of thing. So with her help, they had a meeting down in Hartford last Friday, and it looks like, we haven't got all the facts yet, but it looks like we'll probably be okay. We won't need a supplemental tax bill, and if we do need one, it'll be very, very small. Nothing like 1.3 million, probably won't even be one. But if there is one, it'll probably be very small. It looks like perhaps there's not too much grounds on this lawsuit. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what happens. That'll probably be withdrawn, or the lawsuit against the 4 fiscal conservative selectmen and the town. That's being talked about now. There may be no basis for that. We don't know for sure yet. And that we may have enough money to give to the schools to meet their minimum budget requirement once it's all agreed with the state. I think there's another meeting in 2 more weeks. But without these 4 people acting on their own, without much help at all from the other Democratic select people, on the day that the budget was agreed by the selectmen, George Clausen wasn't even there. Most important vote of the year for our town, 65% of our budget. Now, throughout this whole ordeal, Lisa Smith stood her ground. She behaved very, very, very professionally. She didn't call anybody any names. She didn't write any nasty letters to the editor. She just spoke at the meetings succinctly and gave her views. She did ask a lot of questions outside the meetings, and she did attend a lot of the subcommittee meetings and things. Now, the other thing that I thought was very, very admirable, and you can read about it in the papers if you go back to the libraries. They have a library of old newspapers in the Beardsley and Memorial Library. You can go see newspapers back 2-3 months there every day. And, of course, they're on the internet. You can see articles there. And you can go to the college library. It doesn't cost anything. You go over there if you're a resident of the state of Connecticut. You go over there. You can use their computers. Or you can go down and look at their library they have of old newspapers, and you can read through the history of this whole thing if you're a grandmother or a mother or anybody who's really concerned about this, any citizen or resident whatsoever here in town. And you can see that Lisa behaved admirably through this whole thing. Now, the thing I think is even more admirable is that when the town committee I read this from the newspapers, of course, but when the town committee met to decide who they would nominate for selectmen from the Democratic Party this time around, Lisa was there, of course, because she was a member of the town committee that decided not to nominate her. But when they nominated the 5 people that will be running for office from the Democratic Party, Lisa Smith voted yes for each person, according to the newspapers. Now, these are people that have been treating her not very, very, very nicely over the last couple of years, from what we read in the papers and in the blogs and what we hear on the streets. But she still was big enough to realize, from her own opinion, the good that some had to offer. And if she thought they were worthy of her vote, she voted for them. And that happened to be all 5 that won. I don't know about anybody else that was nominated. They didn't say about that in the paper, but so here's 5 people that wouldn't vote for her to be on a selectman again because they felt she was not following the party line and trying to work with others, which they had committed to do in their campaign over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. But she was up, and still is, trying to work with the Democratic Party, work with those select people, the ones that are there now and the future ones, and also to try to work with all the other organizations in town. The Republican Party, the Independent Party, the Taxpayer Association, and anybody else in town who may have a good idea, may have something positive to offer to the community. She has been very vocal in the paper about saying, and like a lot of people from Texas do nowadays, you can't spend more than you earn. You can't spend more than you earn. I read in the paper just a couple days ago one of the articles they had about Lisa. And I agree with her on that. Now, there's many things I don't agree with Lisa on, and there's many things she wouldn't agree with me on. And there's many things I don't agree with the Republicans on, or the independents, or anybody. That's one of our assets here in America. We can state our opinions, and we shouldn't be vilified for stating those opinions, and as we shouldn't vilify others either. And Lisa set a very good example there. She set a good example for her family. She set a good example for the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and the Independent Party and the Taxpayer Association and the other groups in town, the Gilbert School, the Board of Education. She's trying to do what's best for everybody, and you can't say that she's not interested in the children. Of course she's interested in the children. She has 5 children. Her husband and all these children, with the exception of one who goes to school in Harvard, have gone through the system here. And she's been in there plugging away, trying to make it better for them, not only academically, but in the sports, setting an example for dealing with the homeless and other areas that needed help. So I think you're very lucky here in this town to have Lisa running again for selectman, as basically on her record in the last couple of years and before. And I think you should spread the word to everybody that you can, that she's running again, that she's trying to do the best for the residents, not just the Democratic Party. She's trying to get people to work together as a team. She's not trying to pit one against the other, one faction against the other. She's trying to carry out the commitments that the Democratic Party made when they ran for office. As far as I can see, she's the only one. Now, other ones have their own little ideas on the way things should go. Some of them have no financial experience whatsoever and don't have the luxury of having a husband who does and have a lot of financial knowledge. And she's willing to stand up, no matter what the circumstances, for what she believes in, what she believes to be the best, not for Lisa Smith, but for the taxpayers and residents of Winston and Winchester. And I'm sure Lisa knows that we need to get more industry into town. We need to get more businesses in here and supply jobs to people. We need to get additional taxpayers to help us be able to afford a lot of the things that we need to do in this town. I've never discussed these things with her, but I can see read between the lines when she's on the selectmen at the meetings and in the paper and all the things she stands for or votes for and votes against. So if you're looking for perfect people to be on the selectmen this time around, forget it. There are not going to be any perfect people on here. We got to have people who can try to do the best for the residents, taxpayers, other groups in town, and their counterparts on the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen. And that's not easy. So I advise you all to spread the word about Lisa. Talk to her if you see her. I got her picture there, so you'll know her if you see her on the street. Write to her and ask her questions if you want, what her beliefs are and what she thinks she can do for the town. I'm sure she'll be coming out with some sort of information sooner or later about her beliefs for the next couple of years in Winston, as will the Republicans, as will the Democrats. But the Democrats tend to usually hide behind anonymity. They don't like to make commitments because then they might have to meet those commitments. For example, they made a commitment to get along and work with everybody. They did not meet that commitment, in my view, and the view of a lot of other people in this town. And these kind of issues that are being taken on here by the fiscal conservatives are tough issues. You can make enemies doing this. They're hard, tough. You're at the state asking them to change their ways, asking them to explain their ways, and asking them to help with a Board of Education that we think in town is perhaps out of control. And you don't have to go back too far in history. Richard Pozo offered to do a forensic audit 6, 7, 8 years ago. He's got a master's degree in accounting. He used to run his own businesses in town. Was not taken up on that by the Board of Education. Now here we are with everybody asking for a forensic audit of the education system in our town. Everybody. We can't get the audit done. It's many months late, many months late. I read in the paper where our auditors think we're one of the only towns that's ever been that late with an audit. That is, we have to get it to the state. And if we don't get the audit done, it's not done properly, agreed by our accountants, at least the veracity of it, then there's a lot of things at stake for us. Loans, grants, all kinds of things. So it's critical, and it doesn't do any good just point fingers, blame this, blame that, blame the auditors, blame the superintendent, blame the Board of Education, blame the selectmen. You can do that all forever. That isn't going to help the situation. What will help the situation is for everybody to get in and work together. Sit down once a day, if necessary, with the superintendent of each of the schools and the finance directors of each of the schools and the finance board of the town, or an agreed member, and a finance member of the board of education, and the town finance director and the auditor, if necessary, and get the thing resolved. That's what needs to happen. And if you read any of the newspapers, and remember I mentioned last time, the newspapers are a little slanted, the three that service our area. They don't come across as being fiscally conservative to me. They come across more as supporting the big spenders. But, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention the town manager. He should be there too, because he has a lot at stake here. Because every dollar that goes to the school system and doesn't go to the town causes him a lot of problems with unions, with his personnel, with the results of his workers. We don't get our roads fixed. Now I'm going to read just a little bit from, till they tell me I'm out of time here. I'm going to read a little bit from Spread the Word About Lisa to everybody and talk to her and try to understand all the good she's done. But when they had their town committee meeting, Republicans put out a little release. And I'm just going to read a couple little pieces from it so you can see where they're coming from. And I'm sure they'll be coming up with a platform, and I'm sure they'll be going to come up with how they did on their last platform, what they promised they would do 2 years ago and what they've achieved in those areas, and what they probably haven't achieved. I'm sure they'll be very frank and out in the open, because that's how fiscal conservatives work. You can see it at the national level and the state level happening right now. They talk detail. But anyway, the local Republicans say that this town's Democratic majority is a rudderless machine that's failed to make difficult choices that would have produced results the taxpayers expected. Republicans and Democrats, and I read from the paper, led by Candy Perez, George Clausen, and Kathleen O'Brien, have failed to address or even acknowledge the breadth and scope of the challenges Winston faces. I agree with them on that. Even worse, Democrats are unable or unwilling to give an accurate accounting of how they spent our tax dollars during the worst economic crisis residents have seen. Selectman Fracasso, second highest vote getter in the last election, noted that a lot of people in this town are struggling financially, socking away every dollar they have just to cover their monthly bills. Given what taxpayers are going through, says Fracasso, the ongoing cat and mouse game, you've seen a lot of this at national level, the Democrats have played with town and school finances is unconscionable. Karen Beadle and Republicans like her believe that Winston residents are shouldering an immense cost of living burden for the sake of supporting a government and school system that's fallen short of expectations. Our test scores are not stellar. The Republicans say that Winston, now more than ever, needs accountable leaders capable of building a government taxpayers can actually afford, and one that produces results. The mayor raised your taxes and spent your money, but our roads are no better. The test scores remain unacceptable, and storefronts remain empty. Selectman Albanese added that residents deserve a government they can feel confident about, and leaders willing to make the types of common sense, kitchen table decisions that taxpayers make every day. Aside from streamlining government, solutions to Winston's financial woes will come from effective economic development. We need more of that. I've been in favor of that. I still think the major push has to come from the finance board at the selectman level. But the Economic Development Commission has improved a lot over the last year and will improve more. These fiscal conservatives, with the help of some of the Democrats, did fund the economic development for the town manager and economic development support a little better this year than perhaps years in the past. Republicans want to increase town revenue, seeking to build partnerships with experienced developers rather than increasing property taxes. A robust business tax base would help curb bickering among elected officials who oversee school and town budgets, said Selectman Fracasso. He added that the choice between effective and affordable government is a false one, and that just increasing taxes isn't the answer. Spending more isn't the answer either. The key to our future is smarter spending and giving residents clear information and choices as to how those dollars are used. We must have a government that is both effective and affordable, but it will take capable leadership to get us there. So the decision will be yours on Election Day. There'll be plenty of TV programs. There'll be plenty of people telling you what they're going to do for you and what they're not going to do for you. You'll have to make up your own mind, but I'll be in here right up till Election Day trying to convince you to be fiscally conservative and sensible about your approaches and be a little careful about the promises made by people who aren't used to keeping their promises. I prefer to go along with people who do keep their promises. So if we can put up the picture of Lisa Smith again, I will close by saying thank you very much for proving me wrong in the last run for selectman 2 years ago, and turning out to be a stellar select person who can work well with others throughout the town, the community, Board of Selectmen, and all that. And thank you for running again, and I encourage everybody in town that's sensible and wants to see our town grow and be once again what it was in the past, to vote for Lisa Smith and other fiscal conservatives running for office. Now, you'll hear the Democrats say we're all fiscal conservatives, but that's not true. You just have to look at their record. Be happy to discuss it with you if you want to, anybody. As you always ask me questions anyway, so I'll do most of it on the program. But thanks a lot. See you perhaps next week. If not, I'll repeat this program next week.